welcome to the Cultivating Calmness Podcast. My name is Kaela Vance, and today I want to just do a quick recap of the summit that I attended this weekend called the Women Should Know Summit, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the reasons that I went to that summit and what I hope to bring back to not only myself, but my clients and maybe even friends and family. So I went to the Women Should Know Summit, and it was hosted by Dawn Combs, and she is the owner of Soda Farm. That's P-H-A-R-M, Soda Farm, up in Marysville, Ohio. And she put on this summit. I want to call it a conference. And it was all about what we as women should know in some of the various stages of our development. Now, there are many stages in our development. It was primarily focused on like adolescence and puberty, like what girls go through in puberty, the fertility years, so once you start to menstruate, and then perimenopause and after. So those were the main categories that were talked about and focused on during this summit. And I learned a lot of information, and I also reheard information that I have heard before. And it's always good to relearn and hear things over and over again. That helps that information to stick and to be able to be incorporated and to put into practice. So I'm glad that I went, and I'm not going to go into all the details today, but really I wanted to talk about some of the I guess coolest things that I took away from this summit. There were many key, I guess, takeaways from it, but for me it was this idea that you as a person, like you and me listening, wherever you are in your stage of life, you know, I am a mother, and my children are younger, so I am nowhere near being a grandmother at this point in my life. But if you are a grandmother and you are listening, or you are not yet a mother, all of these things will pertain to you. And this is something that I had learned previously, but I heard it in a different way, and I heard different pieces and parts to this idea this time around. And, you know, I can bring that all together with like therapy concepts and other ways that I have heard this information before. And it just, I guess, becomes full picture. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. So I don't know about you, but I had seen, I don't know how long ago it was at this point, probably years and years ago, that you as a person, that your grandmother actually carried you when your mother was in her womb. So how does that work, right? So your grandmother, when she was pregnant with your mom, you were an egg inside your mom, the baby, in her womb, in her uterus. And the reason that is because your mom had all of the eggs she was ever going to have, and you were one of those eggs. So I thought that was fascinating when I learned that, and I just think that is a really cool fact to know. So if you didn't know, now you do. But to go along with that, any of the choices that your grandmother made in her lifetime, whether she was pregnant or not pregnant, will affect you, because of that key fact that I just said right there, that you were being carried by your grandmother at some point in your life, you know, before you were even a thought. You know, part of you was already formed and part being. And we can't go back and change any of those things that our grandparents did. We can't go back and change anything that they were exposed to, any of the traumas that they may have experienced. Same with our mothers. and our fathers. We can't change any of those things. And one of the things that Dawn brought up is that we maybe want to blame them or find fault, and there's not necessarily any fault to be had. I know that there are choices that I've made that I would do differently if I had the information that I have today back when I made whatever choice it was that I made. And our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents and on and on and on may do the same thing if they knew that the choices they were making were going to affect generations to come. And that made me think even harder about, the choices that I make. And, I've already had my kids and there's no plan to have any other kids. But the traumas that I've experienced, the toxins that I'm exposed to, the things that I eat during my pregnancy, affected my children, my daughter, and the eggs that she's carrying and that she's going to eventually, have and make babies with. And I can't go back and change any of those things or those choices that I made. But I can do my best to try to correct those things now, today, to teach her and my son the best things that they can do to affect change in their lives as they go on, so that when they meet their partners and they choose to have children, that they are making healthy choices for themselves to continue healthier patterns down the road. Now, I am not perfect and I don't do all the things right, and the things I talk to my clients about, I am learning and I am trying to practice. And so I know that, a lot of times the struggle that you are going through, if you're a client of mine, that I may also be experiencing similar things. Definitely not the same, because everybody is different. But just know that you're not alone in making changes, and that change is hard. Even hearing information that is shocking can still take time to digest and then implement in your own life. But that's the biggest piece. The biggest takeaway I had was that, we are physically and emotionally connected to our grandmothers and the choices that they made, even potentially our great-grandmothers, and on and on. And those things continue to get passed down genetically, physically, emotionally, and there is science to show those things as well. For example, I can't quote who the scientist was or what study this was, and I don't even know that Dawn talked about this, but somebody recently talked about this, and it was that there was a study with rats, and it was showing how emotional trauma was passed down in rats. And what they did was they allowed rats to smell, I think, cherry blossoms, and then that was followed by an electric shock. And then the next generation of rats, when they smelled cherry blossoms, their physical body reactions were the same as their parent who had been given the shock, except the child was not given the shock. So when they smelled cherry blossoms, their heart rate or whatever was happening in the parent's body when they got shocked also happened to the child rat. And so we think about those things with our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and on and on and on, how that generational trauma can be passed down even without trying. So, Dawn didn't necessarily mention that in specifically that I can recall in her training, but those are some of the things that I connected from other trainings that I've been to, for other information that I have heard and learned, that we're all connected, and it's never just one thing. So when I talk to people about trauma, as a holistic therapist, I want to know some of these things. What happened to your grandparents? Where did they come from? What was life like for them? Did they experience anything during pregnancy or during childhood or just life? What do they know that their parents experienced? I know a decent amount of information about my grandparents, and I can imagine where some of the things that I experienced and some of the reactions that I have potentially could come from them, and the ways maybe that they were treated or the ways that they were raised, and how that domino effect can happen even without trying, even if you don't want it to. So that was, I guess, the biggest takeaway that I got from this summit. But there's tons of information, too much information to repeat, but also just a lot of information to take in. And so it'll be, some review of information for me, to be able to regurgitate that and practice it myself, to share with my friends and family, and to share and pass on to my clients. So, it was about kind of the life cycle of women and development, puberty, fertility, perimenopause, menopause, but how those things affect their life, their functioning, their mental health, is important. So now that I have more information in this area, I can talk to my clients about this. I can encourage them to track their cycles, to get their hormones tested. We can talk more about herbs or remedies that potentially could be helpful for them. And they can speak to their provider about those things to help their hormones. Your hormones greatly affect the way that you feel, the way that you think, the way that you behave. And so going to therapy is great. It's one step in the puzzle. And if I'm only doing therapy and I'm only talking about what you're coming to therapy with, like, I experience, I'm grieving the loss of somebody in my family, let's talk about that. If that's all we're talking about, that's great. And that may be helpful. And it is helpful. But it'll be more helpful if we understand the whole picture. Your whole life. What are you coming to me with? What's the baggage that you're coming to me with? Not just you, but your parents, your grandparents, if you know it. What are your cycles like? What is your diet like? What is, what are your bowel movements like? Do you have those? Anything like that can be helpful in giving me a bigger picture, a better picture of what's going on with you. Now, I definitely can't solve the problem of those things, but it's something we can talk about, or it's something I can refer you out to another provider that does have more of that information that can help you with learning about those things and making those changes along with doing therapy. Another, I guess, takeaway, and again, this is something that I've known for a while, but was brought up again in this summit, was just the difference between common versus normal. And even normal was kind of challenged at this summit. Just because something is normal for you doesn't mean it's normal for me. Your body is different than my body is different than, my neighbor's body is from my best friend's body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't say that everything that affects you is going to be the same as your best friend or the same as me. They could be similar, but definitely not the same. Your periods are the same way. Your doctors and the media like to advertise and tell you that your cycle is 28 days. That's what it should be. And the information that I gathered from Dawn is that, yes, that's a good average, and that's fairly common, maybe even considered normal, but that there are fluctuations. But once you know your cycle, what I did learn was that is your cycle. For the most part, there may be things that you do, there may be stressors that may change your cycle slightly, or imbalances that can drastically change your cycle. But if everything is balanced and everything is the way it should be, your cycle will be your cycle, and you should be able to tell what day you are on, at any point in the month, because that will be unique to you as a person. And so that's how I do therapy is, it's unique to you. Nobody's story is just like yours. So nobody's therapy is going to be just like yours. And it shouldn't be. And that's how you should feel with any doctor or provider that you go to, is that you are not a one-size-fits-all problem. And your body wants to heal. It wants to get back to the way it's supposed to work. And if it's not doing that, it's trying to, and we can help it in many various ways. So sometime soon, I will probably be doing some kind of reel, or maybe I'll do it in my next podcast. But I would like to do a visual. I'm a very visual person. You can definitely watch that if you watch these, to show some of the way generational trauma can work, in a very simple explanation that I've seen kind of floating around social media, but I would like to do it myself. So keep an eye out for that. I'll probably be doing something with that soon. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to speaking again to you next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day.